let's move our focus to the telecom industry. From tariff hikes to AGR due issues and the latest satellite spectrum row, the sector has been in news lately. We are now joined by Navin, the head of APAC Telecommunications at UBS Securities, from the sidelines of the UBS India Summit 2024. Good afternoon, Navin. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, there's so much happening as far as the telecom space in India is concerned. Do you think, number one, that this space can continue to remain at least a three-player market? Vodafone Idea has seen significant price erosion too.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, actually. So look, I mean, if you go in theory, we actually have 4 operators in the market today, including BSNL. I think obviously the government has stated that they would like to have 3 private players at the very least, and then possibly for BSNL to continue. And we have seen initiatives taken from the government in the past around AGR and spectrum payment deferrals that have allowed for that to happen. I do think a very important milestone will be around next year or maybe a little bit before that, because a lot of the moratorium periods come to an end between June to December 2025. And I think we would probably expect the government to take more steps to support Vodafone Idea. I think the base case that we have, and which we think industry has, is that there will probably be more deferrals, maybe more equitization. Our view is that maybe more would be required, including potential cancellation or even waiver of some of those dues, which is not that easy to execute, but we think in the interest of the industry, maybe there are ways that can be done. But again, like I said, June 2025 or right before that is the time frame when we would expect the government to take some action on that front.
Right. From an investable standpoint, you said while in theory there are 4 stocks, from an investable standpoint, that leaves one with just about 2.5 if one was to look at Vodafone as that half. I wanted your thoughts on how does one play it? Do you go with the pure play telecom player? Do you go with the conglomerate where the hope is that at some point there will be a demerger? Or do you back the half chance there? I ask this because, everyone's hoping for some sort of tariff hikes to come by as well. If you could give us a sense on, how does one play this from an investment standpoint, even as the macros for the telecom sector hold up the population, increasing data consumption, cheapest cost of data, etc.?
Yeah. So, look, I'll make 3 points. First of all, if you look at telecom sector globally, generally there is a tendency for stocks within the same country to have very strong correlation. So when a sector is in a price repair mode, growth mode, profitability mode, tendency is for all stocks to do well. And then similarly, when we are entering a period of competition or regulatory uncertainty, then there is a good chance for the whole sector to underperform. So there is generally a very strong amount of correlation that all telecom stocks within a single market tend to have. Now, that being said, obviously, as you rightly pointed out, in India, we have a bit of a unique situation in the sense that we have a pure play telco. We have a telco where there are balance sheet issues. And then, of course, we have got a conglomerate. Now, if you look at the point you made earlier about tariffs, so we have had 3 rounds of tariff increases in the last 4 years, 4.5 years. And essentially, if you look at India's mobile revenue as a percentage of GDP, it's actually now comparable to most other emerging markets, maybe about 10% lower. So we think there is room for tariffs to continue to go up, but not probably at the same pace at which they have gone up in the last 3-4 years. We think it will be important for the operators, therefore, to start differentiating pricing because we have a very flat pricing structure right now. And so there is probably a need to create a range of pricing plans such that customers who have the ability to pay more, who want to consume more data, or who want more premium services like roaming, content, etc., are charged more. But at the same time, there is no across-the-board price increase for everybody in the ecosystem. And that's probably going to be the next phase that we would expect to continue. I think from a stock perspective, again,
right.
Yeah. Sorry,
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
No, I was just saying from a stock perspective, again, as I said before, generally there tends to be correlation among all stocks in the sector. But then, of course, here we have a unique situation in the sense that one of the operators is very sensitive to what the government does on the AGR. So the operating trends are probably less important to the whole equity value creation for that business. And that obviously makes it more of a play on the point I made earlier about what the government is going to do next year.
Right. Navin, number one, talk to us about the ability of the consumer to actually absorb price hikes. In the last round of tariff price hikes you actually saw a little bit of down trading happening, and you actually saw people with 2 SIM cards, going ahead and migrating to 1 SIM card. That is the first question. Second question, what is the blue sky scenario as far as Vodafone Idea is concerned? What is the best that they can hope for in terms of regulatory relief coming in? Because the Supreme Court judgment has been quite clear. And we believe that, the last time, you had a report on Vodafone Idea and actually upgraded it to a buy rating. Has there been any change in stance, from that particular view that you had then?
Right. So let me answer your first question on consumer ability to absorb, right? So look, the first tariff increase, which was done in December 2019, did result in significant churn. But that is also because at that time we did have an inflated customer base because Reliance Jio had just entered the market, and there were a lot of double SIMs and triple SIMs even. We did notice that in the second and then in the recent tariff increase, the number or the magnitude of churn did decline. It's not zero, but the magnitude of churn has definitely come down. On the downgrade side as well, yes, there has been some, because if you look at the ARPU increase that the 3 operators have reported, or the 2 operators have reported so far, it is less than the percentage tariff increase that they implemented. I'd wait for 1 more quarter to come to a conclusion. But even then, there is definitely some downgrades. In fact, we had done a consumer survey right about the time when the tariff increase was implemented. And our conclusion back then was about 20 to 25% of customers were looking to downgrade, particularly from the 1.5 GB plan, which is the most common plan, to 1 GB per day. So there are downgrades, there is churn. And yet, if you look at it on a total basis, the sector would have probably grown revenues 7-8% in the last quarter. And maybe another 5% in the next quarter. And so cumulatively, you would have seen 12-13% sector revenue growth. So, there is elasticity, but net, there is still a decent pass-through of the tariff increase in terms of sector revenues. Of course, at some point, as you rightly pointed out, you need to be careful because, after all, telecom is a product that is consumed by masses. And which is why the point I made earlier was that over time, telcos will have to think about changes in tariff structure, which are not across the board, but which only make the upper end of the market pay for premium services that could be offered. On your second question on Vodafone, look, I think if you look at the operating situation, they have positive operating cash flow, right? So if you look at EBITDA minus lease payments, they are generating operating cash flow. And with the capital raise that they have done, they also have at least the next 2 to 3 years of capex sorted out. There is a bank funding process which is going on. We don't know a lot of detail about that. But if that plays out, then that kind of sorts out another 1 to 2 years of capex. And I would believe if you look at the numbers, the capex and all that they've talked about, in 3 to 4 years, they should get to a fighting kind of 4G coverage. So I think from an operating perspective, the company has a plan in place. The challenge when it comes to the investability or any kind of view on the stock is the total amount of debt, large part of which is government debt, which then is a little bit difficult to value because you don't know when it will be paid, whether there will be deferrals, whether there will be cancellations, whether there will be equitization, if there is equitization, at what price. Right. And so given all those uncertainties, I can imagine that the range of scenarios on the stock are quite substantial.
All right, let's keep it very simple then before we let you go, Navin. 2-part question. One, in your model, given the explanations that you've given on account of, price hikes and the models that these companies would, perhaps undertake, what is the effective price hike that you've factored in over the next 3 years on a compounded basis in your model? That's point number 1. And secondly, is there a way to play this theme via ancillaries and not just the listed telecom companies that we have? Pure play telecom companies, can we play it via telecom infra or ancillaries?
Sure. So on the price hike, so we have about a high single-digit ARPU increase that translates to about 8-9% CAGR over the next 3 years. Not all of that is coming from price increase, by the way. Remember, there are secular factors: 2G to 4G migration, prepaid to postpaid migration, 1.5 GB customer migrating to 2 GB, and so on and so forth. So if you dissect, I would say that there's probably 5 to 6% annual price increase that we are building, and then maybe another 4% which is coming from these secular factors that I talked about. Now, obviously, it's not going to be annual 5-6% price increases. There's going to be a one-off. We don't know when, but at some point in the next 2 years.
Right.
So that's what essentially goes into our model. The sector revenue growth is a bit higher than that, because remember, there is some organic growth in the number of customers as well. So the sector revenue growth that we have is around 10 to 11%. So that's kind of what goes into our model. I think your second question was on ancillaries. So, I mean, the ancillary space in India, to be fair, is not that deep. I mean, we have the tower companies, we have a couple of fiber companies, a couple of infrastructure companies, but it's not as deep as you would have in a market like a US or a China, where the whole ecosystem is listed or playable in the equity markets. But I mean, on the tower companies, again, the challenge there is a lot of that is dependent on the Vodafone Idea viability. And I kind of talked about the puts and takes there.
Right.
The rest of the ecosystem, again, a lot of them are very small. But yeah, there are definitely some names that you can play there more as a capex interplay for the larger telcos. And I think, I guess the last point I would make there
Navin.
is we are seeing a shift in capex, which will help.
Very sorry, Navin, to interrupt you, but we're running out of time. Moving on, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts on the telecom space. Well, moving on, CNBC-TV18 celebrates 25 years of excellence. We invite you to the most anticipated event of the year, the CNBC-TV18 Global Leadership Summit on November 14, starting 10 a.m. onwards. A power-packed day with several panels focusing on India's economy, digital landscape, markets, entertainment, and a lot more. Only and only on CNBC-TV18.